Today I'm recording at the brokerage rather than my home office. I'm getting a feel for the setup here, the lighting here, so I figured I would do a quick test video where I answer a question about lame buyers and what to do about these types of buyers. What inspired me to answer this is I saw a question online posted on a forum. I go on the forums every once in a while, the realtor forums, real estate agent forums. This one person wrote how a buyer backed out after 3 months. Now, the first thing that came to mind, just because from a broker perspective, I hear about sellers that keep giving extensions to buyers. And so I'm thinking in my head, okay, this is a buyer that's had this escrow that's just been drawn out. And that's because a seller hasn't put down a firm boundary. And my answer to this usually is that a seller should always send a notice to perform if a buyer is not being punctual. If the EMD, if the earnest money deposit, isn't in escrow in time, send a notice to perform. If the buyer doesn't remove a contingency, send a notice to perform. If the buyer wants more time, offer an extension, but add a per diem fee. Put a per diem fee in there so the buyer has to pay for that extension. And if the buyer isn't closing on time, you send a demand to close. And here's the thing about a notice to perform or demand to close. You don't have to wait until the buyer is late. A notice to perform, you have 2 days for the buyer to perform, or the seller, depends who's sending it. But you have a 2-day waiting period. That 2-day waiting period can begin 2 days prior to the expiration of the performance period. So you could send a notice to perform 2 days before contingencies are supposed to be removed. Now, a demand to close is a 3-day waiting period. So a seller can send a buyer a demand to close 3 days prior to the scheduled closing date. And what this allows is that if the buyer doesn't perform on that closing date, then the seller can cancel the following day. That's how it works. So a seller should always keep a buyer punctual. And if they give extensions, the buyer should be releasing a portion or all of their earnest money deposit to a seller, or paying a per diem for the extension. But that wasn't what this person was talking about when it was posted online. This person was talking about showing 25 homes to a buyer over 3 months, only to have the buyer decide that they don't want to buy anymore, and they're still listing their home, but they're listing it with someone else. This is actually easier, less challenging to deal with than what I was just describing. And that's because if you are working with a buyer that's consuming that much of your time, let's call it resources. Let's take all the time you're spending, the money you're spending. You spend membership dues to have access to the MLS, to look up properties, to take a buyer out in your vehicle that costs money, $5 a gallon of gas in California at least. You have all these resources invested. If you're going to spend that with a buyer, that buyer needs to make a commitment to you, an exclusive commitment. Now, it doesn't have to happen immediately. It doesn't have to happen during the first showing. The first showing, you should use at the very least a property showing agreement. It's a form we have, a proprietary form, a 1-page form, where basically if you open a home for a buyer, that buyer must use it with you, or must use you as their agent to purchase the home. But that's not the problem here. The problem here is that this buyer spun this agent's wheels for 3 months, looking at over 24 homes. So how does an agent fix that? Well, first off, you got to screen your buyers really well. Screen them really well. Second off, get a buyer representation agreement signed. And if this person's going to list their home, get a listing agreement signed. Get commitments in writing from a client. Do not spend that much time showing properties if you don't have something in writing, some sort of commitment. Ask for a commitment. If they may not buy, but they are going to sell. Now, if this person's selling, they're probably going to buy. They're just trying to ditch this buyer's agent, and they'll likely use their same listing agent. There's no excuse that a buyer can give you in which they won't sign a buyer representation agreement if you're working this hard for them. There's no excuse. I'll tell you a very quick story. Years ago, many years ago, I worked as a buyer's agent in a busy real estate office. There was a property showing agreement similar to the one that we use now that basically states, look, if I open the door, if I come and show this property to you, you have to use me as the agent. I don't care about any other property. You can work with other agents. This is not monogamous, but on this particular property in which I drove over here, I'm spending my time, I printed this stuff out, I'm over here acting as your agent, you use me, not someone else. You don't have me show properties and then have your uncle write up the offer. Well, this group came down, this big group of people in an SUV. They drove from like an hour away, and I was showing a big home in La Jolla. And I remember standing there with a clipboard and that 1-page form. not an unreasonable request. And they arrived at the doorstep, I politely asked, I gave them my little presentation and explained that the form is not overly aggressive, and they refused to sign. And I politely told them, look, if you're refusing to sign this, I simply can't open the property for you. And I remember walking away while they screamed at me, and they told me they'd have my license, and they said all sorts of terrible things. It was a very uncomfortable walk, but I walked back to my car and I drove off. And I remember looking in my side mirror at them just standing in the street dumbfounded. You have to set boundaries or else you'll get burned. That's how this industry works. So with this person, get a commitment for the listing, get a commitment with the buyer representation agreement, and screen your buyer. If they haven't been pre-qualified by a lender, don't even waste your time. If they don't have a proof of funds that they've delivered to you, that you have in your possession, where it shows a down payment amount and or full cash purchase price amount in their bank account, they need to show some cash, whether it's for the whole cash purchase or if they're getting a mortgage, just enough for the down payment. But in your possession, you should have a proof of funds, you should have a pre-qualification letter from the lender, and that's before you even show the first property. Don't even bother showing property to someone that can't afford it or hasn't even done the very easy legwork of getting pre-qualified. So that's how you screen out buyers. You set boundaries. You must do this for your sanity. I am so full of stories that I've heard from agents over the years that have just been burned so terribly by buyers that they thought they had a strong relationship with. You have to understand, it doesn't matter how great of a rapport you have with the buyer, they're not thinking that way. They may have something else that comes up, or a relative, or someone that lays a guilt trip on them, and takes their business because you've been polite, you've been the nice person, and they know that it's easier just to say, never mind, we're not interested with you, than it is to turn down their friend or relative that is begging for their business. That's why you must have boundaries written. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Thank you for watching.